Welcome to the San Gorgonio Chapter's Trail Talk series. Once a month, the third Wednesday of each month at 7 o'clock, we do a Zoom session with a guest speaker on various topics. And tonight's topic is about the history of human impact on the San Bernardino Mountains. And my name is John St. Clair, and I am your Zoom host. I'm one of 3 committee members that organize the Trail Talk series. And I want to go over a couple of procedures, guidelines for this Zoom session before I introduce the speaker. So first of all, everybody needs to be muted. And I'm looking and it looks like almost everybody's muted. And I can mute you if you aren't. And so the only person that will not be muted is the speaker, or right now myself, because I'm opening the Zoom session. And you'll stay muted the entire time. If you have a question about the topic while the speaker is speaking, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that looks like a talking bubble from a cartoon. And has the word chat under it. And if you click on that, it opens up a little window that you can type your question into. And I'll be monitoring that and may relay questions to our speaker when the time is appropriate. And then after the talk is finished, you can unmute yourself and ask any questions you want. Now, you should have received a reminder about this meeting, which I didn't send out till like just before 6 tonight. And in that email has a link to the San Gorgonio Chapter YouTube channel, because this, and as all Trail Talks are, this is being recorded and will be posted to the YouTube channel either tonight or tomorrow sometime. And so if you're not able to watch this whole thing, or if you really like it, share to one of your friends, hey, you should watch this, you can forward that email that I sent you with the YouTube channel link in it to share it with other people. So I believe that's, I'm going to check once more. It looks like everybody is muted. That's good. And at this point, I will introduce our speaker. Walter Roth is a retired elementary school teacher. He's been a Sierra Club member since 1970 and a San Gorgonio Wilderness Association volunteer ranger for 23 years, where he has done trail maintenance, trail patrols, and evening ranger talks at Greyback Amphitheater in Barton Flats. So I'm going to remove my spotlight and put the spotlight on Walter and let him go ahead with his presentation.
Okay, I will just get the slideshow started here. First of all, I'll give a disclaimer, and that's that I'm not an expert on this, but I can read, and I have read a lot about it, and I'm very interested in the area because I've been hiking up in here since I was 9 years old. If you're familiar with the area, San Gorgonio Wilderness and vicinity, then this will mean a lot more to you. But if you're not totally familiar with it, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the area. This is Mount San Gorgonio. And see if I can get my pointer. There. Mount San Gorgonio up here, tallest mountain in Southern California. This picture was taken in '67. And it looks a lot different now. What else is here in San Gorgonio? Well, we have some high altitude vegetation like these trees, limber pines that grow along the ground. We've got waterfalls, believe it or not, some forests. We've got some mountain peaks, and even occasionally when it's wet enough, we have a couple of lakes. I'm going to divide the history of the area into 4 different periods: Native American, Spanish and Mexican, Gold Rush, exploitation period, and recreation tourism. There are 2 tribes that shared the area. One was north, those were the Serrano, and one was southeast, and those were the Cahuilla. The Serrano were a little more high altitude, but in spite of that, none of the tribes, there's no evidence that they went very much higher than Barton Flats. That's kind of about the limit of where they went. They have done extensive archaeological surveys in the San Gorgonio Wilderness, and they've never found any evidence that they ventured up there. And being a very practical people, there really wasn't much reason to, because there just isn't that much up there that would be of any use to them. They lived in this area, nobody knows exactly how long, but the scientists tell us at least 10,000 years. And in all that time, the impact was extremely small because, of course, they lived in harmony with nature. They didn't exploit it. They actually cultivated it, eating pine nuts from the trees, so pine trees, eating acorns from the trees, and hunting what game they could find, as well as various kinds of plants that grew in the ground. And here we go. She's leaching out the acorns. They're ground, and there are artifacts in our mountains that showed where they have mortar holes where they have ground the acorns. And we have place names still in existence in our area, like Yucaipa. That was actually a band of Indians, a band of Cahuilla Indians, the Mojave in the north, Taquitos, Temescal, Cucamonga, and I can't read the last one because my little screen is in the way here.
Temecula.
Temecula. Yeah, those are all, as I have found, I looked them up on the internet, so I'm basing it on what they tell me, the most reliable sources I could find on the internet. Okay, Spanish and Mexican periods. First Spanish contact, unbelievably, was 1542. I mean, we can stop and think that the Pilgrims landed in 1620. This is pretty early, considering how far away it is for them to get here. But all they really did was kind of get out of their ship, row into shore, stick a flag in the ground and say, Spain owns all this. They didn't do much with it until the mission period, and the missions were started mainly because of the Russians. Russians started coming down from Russia down the coast, hunting sea otters because of their fantastic furs. And so they started building these missions as a way of sort of staking out their territory, as well as converting the local population. They were pretty much self-sufficient, growing crops of various kinds and having sheep and cattle. And they changed the environment pretty substantially just from that, just the missions alone, because they introduced a lot of non-native plants, which were Mediterranean and were better adapted to the environment, better adapted to the Southern California than the native plants. Then comes the ranchos. After the Mexican Revolution, Mexico took over the jurisdiction, and the mission territories were divided up and given to individual people. The ranchos were completely dependent on cattle ranching, a totally cattle-based economy. And one of those ranchos was known as Rancho San Gorgonio, and it was in the San Gorgonio Pass out there by Banning, the easternmost rancho. It was actually named after a obscure saint, Saint Gorgonius, 304 AD, Christian martyr. That's where the name San Gorgonio came from.
Myself seen.
Okay, well, I had to get somebody off. You're back on now.
Okay, got it. Okay, San Gorgonio has been known as San Bernardino Mountain, Grizzly Peak, or Greyback at various times. And San Gorgonio came because one particular map maker just decided that San Bernardino Mountain was too broad of a term. It referred to the entire range, all the mountains. So we wanted to have one that was just for the peak of San Gorgonio. And so we named it after the San Gorgonio Pass. Okay. One of the first people to come into what is now San Gorgonio Wilderness was a surveyor. 1852, now California became a state in 1850. And so he climbed up to near the top of San Bernardino Peak in order to establish a baseline for surveying all of Southern California. And the street known as Baseline is right on top of that line. And that's why it's called Baseline. You might be curious how Big Bear got its name. Some people have said, well, it's because it's shaped like a big bear. Well, that's not really what happened. The story is that in 1854, or 45, excuse me, a rancher who was a Mexican citizen, actually, went up into the mountains in order to find a shortcut to the Mojave Desert. And the reason was because his cattle had been stolen. And so he got all of his hands routed up, and he sent a lot of them through the Cajon Pass to try to catch them that way. And then he went over the mountains hoping to find a shortcut. But by accident, he ran into this lake, which is now Baldwin Lake. And he called it Bear Lake because they had so many grizzly bears living there. And they never got their cattle back. What is now Big Bear Lake looked a lot like this. It was a big meadow before they built the dam and flooded it, made a lake out of it. This picture is actually Lake Arrowhead before it was flooded and made into a lake. I couldn't find a picture of Big Bear before it was a lake. Black bears are not native to our Southern California mountains. Grizzlies are. And that's one reason we have a grizzly on our flag. We had a gold rush in Southern California. It was about 10 years after the gold rush in Sacramento. And it was in Bear Valley, where the Big Bear Lake is right now. And then a little bit later on in Holcomb Valley and Gold Mountain. It started out with panning gold. That was the easiest gold to find, and placer mining. The miners were definitely exploiters. They killed all the bears. The grizzly bears became extinct because the miners were hungry. But after the easy gold was extracted, then the big guys came in, the industrial miners came in, and they started going into the ground to get the gold because the surface gold was gone. They built some stamp mills, which are ore crushers. It's too expensive to haul out all the rocks that have the gold in them. And so it needs to be crushed and the rock removed and just get the gold as pure as possible in order to be shipped out. And that's what this ore crusher does. The inside of it looks like this. These giant hammers smash the rocks and crush it, and then they run water on it and put in chemicals. Cyanide and mercury are what they use. And you can see, of course, they have no protective gear. There still is some, you might call mining today in the Big Bear area. There's a marble quarry. Some people, if they look north from a high altitude, will notice a big white strip. And I've encountered people on the trail who insist that that's snow. And when I explain to them it's actually marble, they are either a disbelief or they're just kind of amazed at that. But logging was definitely something that started very early. Even the Spanish came in and went up Mill Creek and took trees down in order to for building materials. And when I look at these pictures, I'm amazed at how huge the trees were that they were cutting down. Of course, they were very selective in cutting the very biggest, best trees they could find. This is the way they haul them out. You can see the size of these trees. Ponderosa pines, Jeffrey pines, pulling them out by oxen or horses with this crazy wheeled contraption that attaches the logs underneath and hauls them out. And then later on, they got in even more industrial with a steam-powered winch that would haul the logs out. So they didn't do any clear cutting. They were very selective in what they were looking for. And then they actually built a railroad to haul the logs into sawmills. And there we have the lumber coming down the road down to the valley. Another industry that was big in our area was grazing, and then later tourism and water. Some of that water was used for irrigation, and some of it was used to generate electricity. This is a meadow up near Dry Lake, and they used to run sheep clear up into the high country in what is now the San Gorgonio Wilderness. This is a native bunch grass. One of the grasses that is still there that from the, a native California grass. You'll still find a lot of the Mediterranean grasses infruiting into our mountains. Barton Flats is called Barton Flats because there was a sheep herder named Hiram Barton who lived near Riverside. He was actually a dentist, but he had an interest in raising sheep as a sideline. And in the summer, the grass was turned brown. It wasn't very good for eating. And so he had hired a shepherd to run the sheep up into the mountains. And they went up to Santa Ana River, all the way up to the top to Barton Flats area. And that's why it's called Barton Flats, because it's named after the dentist. Of course, sheep, as you probably know, are very damaging. They can overgraze. And here is an area that was completely eaten off right to the dirt. And this is the same vicinity, not the exact same area, but it's in the same area after it was allowed to recover. But there were also cattle. We had cowboys up there. The Heart Bar Ranch, it's called the Heart Bar because that was their brand, a heart and a bar. And they ran cattle. When they took them to market, and believe it or not, they took them down to Banning. They went over to Mission Creek, if you're familiar with that, where that is, over by the what is now the Pacific Crest Trail, and took them down the mountain all the way down to basically pretty close to Whitewater, so they could catch the railroad. The first two guys to actually climb San Gorgonio Peak were surveyors. They were California surveyors, local guys from San Bernardino. And after they discovered that peak and wrote about it, we began to get some tourism. San Gorgonio began to attract the attention of a lot of people. And of course, population kept growing. So even in the early days, people were hiking up to San Gorgonio. However, it was a pretty tough climb. There weren't any trails there at first. Here some people are on the summit. Irrigation at this period of time also became a big priority because the valleys were getting populated and agriculture was one of the main industries. And there just isn't enough water down there. And so they were interested in building dams and having water for the summer. So a lot of projects were being created to have irrigation water and also electricity generation. This is actually Big Bear when it first began. You can see how it was a meadow and all these trees are now underwater. And this is the original dam that was built before they put in a more permanent dam, which still exists today. And this here was a bunch of logs linked together to keep debris from getting up to the dam. One of the projects, a water project, was to create electricity for the area in Redlands and Yucaipa. And one of the owners of a camp, one of the places down in Mill Creek for visitors to stay, hired a guy named Dobbs to collect all the water that he could on the southern side of San Gorgonio. So he tried to get 3 different creeks, Falls Creek and Alger Creek and another creek, combine the water together and put it in a flume and generate electricity. But the project never got completed. But the cabin, the space that the cabin is on is a very nice campsite, and it's still called Dobbs Camp. And one of these logs is still there. People use it as a bench to sit on. But he also, after the project failed, built some trails and started taking people up to San Gorgonio. He built a trail up to the Dollar Lake Saddle, and then from there was no trail to the summit of San Gorgonio. Maybe you've heard of Jenks Lake or seen Jenks Lake. It's not a natural lake, it's a man-made lake. And it was created by a guy named Jenks. This is him. He was a Civil War veteran. He claimed he was a captain. That might be true, might not. He was a teller of tall tales. This is the remains of his cabin. Picture was taken around 1900 something, and it was already falling apart. But he found a little meadow. He dished it out with some mules and some equipment, made kind of a dam there, collected water, and then put fish in it. And his idea was to supply fish for San Bernardino. And the project didn't work out too well. And then he decided he would have it as a tourist attraction and charge people to come in and fish at his lake for recreation. And that's still done today. This is another lake that is in the San Gorgonio Wilderness. And it's called Dry Lake because it does dry up. And with all the droughts we've been having, it doesn't get water very often. It has to be a pretty good year. But it was also an artificial lake created by a guy, Vincent Taylor, who wanted to build a resort pretty much right where I took this picture from. And that would be a beautiful place to have a resort, but it never panned out. But his lake is still there. These resorts started popping up all over the place, and they became very popular. It was kind of a fad to get out into nature at this particular time in history. One of the things that was, people showed up in California seeking their fortune. So they had all kinds of creative ways of doing it. The water projects, mining, cattle, timber, whatever it is, they were looking for some way to support themselves. And one of the ways was to build a road. At this time, road building was a profitable enterprise. Guys would go up and create their own road. They didn't really get anybody's permission. They just built it. Then they would put up a gate across it and charge people to use it. And that was how they made their living. In fact, if you're familiar, this is one of the little crossing bars that they would lower down across the road and then wait for you to pay, and then they would raise it up or turn it. And that's where the term turnpike actually came from, because a pike is a stick. This is the road is kind of where the highway is today, going up to Big Bear from San Bernardino. Then there was the Rim of the World highway was built, and they would take loads of tourists in these touring cars and just drive around for sightseeing, another way to make a living. After they became so popular and so many people exploiting the area, the Forest Service finally got involved and took possession of the area. These are the first forest rangers in charge of the San Bernardino National Forest. Their mission was to protect the watershed and to protect the resources, not like a national park. Some people think, oh, the Forest Service is like the national park. They're not interested in preserving nature for people to enjoy. That's just one of the things that they might be interested in, but mostly they were interested in keeping the resource from being destroyed by people coming in and just cutting and digging and whatever else they were doing, because they had been used to exploiting the area without anybody interfering with them. This is one of the reasons that when they first hired backcountry rangers, they wanted people that were very tough, self-reliant, and one of the qualifications was to be a good shot. And the reason was because they were essentially law enforcement to keep poachers out from cutting timber or whatever else, and they would meet resistance, and they had to be able to either enforce the law or protect themselves from people who also might be armed. This is Horse Meadows, if you're familiar with that, on the trail up to Poop Out Hill. There's still a couple of buildings there. This was a Forest Service station. And they did keep horses there, and they had mounted rangers back in the day. In fact, one of our volunteers in SGWA, San Gorgonio Wilderness Association, actually in the early days worked here for the Forest Service. So these roads kept being built. Pretty soon people could take cars up, and these resorts were popping up everywhere. This is one of the roads that was built. They didn't go up over Onyx Summit for some reason. I don't know why. They just went straight up over the mountain. Now, if you go over that, you probably end up just about where the ski lift is on the other side, Big Bear. This road still exists, and it is still passable if you have a four-wheel drive. They had traffic jams back in those days. One of the reasons was because the toll roads were small and just one way. So on weekends, they had to allow maybe every hour or so, I'm not sure what the time was, but they would have all the uphill traffic go. And then when it got through, they would stop it and then let the downhill traffic go. So people had to be kind of patient. (1923), this guy, Harry C. James, pretty amazing guy. He was our first preservationist. He used to take groups of kids to the top of San Gorgonio. It was kind of like the Boy Scouts. He called them the Western Rangers. Here's a picture of them. They didn't have a good trail in those days. The only trail that was all the way to the summit was the Vivian Creek Trail, which was actually built by one of the resort owners so that his guests would have something to do when they got there. He wanted to have an attraction. Harry C. James is important because one of these kids on one of these trips told him that it would be a shame if this area that they were hiking in ever got overgrown with houses and roads and so forth. And he spent the rest of his life fighting to keep a development out of the San Gorgonio, what is now the San Gorgonio Wilderness. During the Depression, lots of trails were built. Most of the trails that are in our area were built during the Depression by the CCC. The mountain, however, did attract a lot of skiers. First in the 30s, and then after World War II, a huge interest in skiing on San Gorgonio. And this continued up until the 1960s. There were a lot of people who wanted to build a resort on top of San Gorgonio Peak and build roads and parking lots and develop the area. The reason is that it's a beautiful ski area, and otherwise you'd have to go clear to the Sierra Nevada to get this kind of skiing. But everybody had to carry their skis in and then climb up to the top of the mountain just to go down one time. So, and in those days, in the 1920s, even the Sierra Club was not too keen on preserving everything. They had a lot of avid skiers in the group, and they were kind of interested in having a road built closer to the San Gorgonio Peak so that they could get in there and do their skiing. And here they are going across Dry Lake, frozen, and then they'll go up to the summit. A lot of people that were avid hikers and backpackers took over the job from Harry C. James. One of them is Joe Mohlmeyer, Alice Kruper, and Clark Jones. They founded an organization called Defenders of the Wilderness. and they fought hard to make it a wilderness, which didn't happen until 1964. The Wilderness Act was passed in Congress. Before that, there wasn't one. Even when I first started hiking in San Gorgonio, it was not a wilderness. It was known as a primitive area. And there's San Gorgonio looking from Pupat Hill. If these people hadn't been such activists and worked so hard to protect the area, this trail right here would have been a road. Dry Lake would have been a parking lot. And San Gorgonio would have had a ski lift and a ski resort on top. Then after they got the ski problem fixed, the ski resort people weren't going to win that. We had another problem. In the 1970s, there was a back to nature fad, and the San Gorgonio Wilderness experienced, and just about and everywhere else, experienced a huge influx of hikers and campers. The problem was they were hiking and camping everywhere. This is a picture of the top of San Gorgonio in the 1960s. And these people are camping on top of it. And it begins to look a little more like Woodstock after a while, with people camping out everywhere. There were no permits, there were no limits, so people could just camp everywhere. Maybe you remember being able to drink water from creeks without being concerned about it. Some people still do that, but it's not wise. But now if you don't filter your water, you're asking for trouble. And that's a result of the tens of thousands of hikers that have come into our area and polluted the water. You're going to have to assume that it's polluted. After the defenders of the wilderness got their wilderness, Alice Kruper helped found another organization, which is called the San Gorgonio Wilderness Association, and they have taken over care of our wilderness. There are no Forest Service paid personnel who do this work now. It's done entirely by volunteers, maintaining the trails, cleaning up the trash. And I can say, from having been visiting the area for a very long time, since the mid-60s, it's cleaner now than it has ever been. It was common to go into a campsite and have fire pits all over the place. And the fire pits would typically be full of cans, plastic, a lot of broken glass, aluminum foil, wrappers, plastic of all different varieties. And you just don't see that very much anymore. Very seldom do people even throw trash. And if they do, we are very diligent about picking it up. But the wilderness ethic of taking care of the place has taken hold, which I'm very pleased to say. However, we have had a problem. There's been fire suppression. Of course, they wanted to preserve the lumber, preserve the timber. And as a result, fires have been put out quickly over the last century or so, and a huge accumulation of fuel has developed. And then you have drought with bark beetle kill, and we have had a large portion of the wilderness burned as a result of possibly just two people that started these fires, and they just took off. And they have been incredibly unnaturally severe. In, of course, a natural situation, fires would start from lightning strikes and burn fairly often, but they would be small. And the ecosystem is adapted to that, small but more frequent fires. But when you have this accumulation of debris on the ground and dense trees, which is unnatural, then the fire is so intense that it kills everything. So this is what it looks like now. And that picture I showed you earlier that was a trail that I said would have been a road. This is that same trail. And that's what it looks like today. This is what San Gorgonio looked like in '67. That's what it looks like now. So we've definitely had an impact. When you stop and consider that our native Californians could live here 10,000 years and had virtually no impact that is visible whatsoever. If anything, they were making the place a little better. And in just 100 years or so, we have transformed the place. Some of it was good intentioned, and some of it is just way too many people in too small an area. So the area was exploited for grazing, mining, timber, water, tourism. So we put in all kinds of roads, resorts, trails, dams, lakes, cabins, campgrounds. And we've definitely disturbed the natural order. And suppressing fires, we ended up burning it. But on the positive side, we have created a wilderness. It's still there for people to enjoy. And there is still quite a bit of natural area there that people can have access to. And even our campgrounds, which look to backpackers, kind of like a parking lot maybe, but a lot of people who live in the city get out and have contact with nature in a way that they never would have otherwise. So those are all, I think, positive things.
Okay, well, bunch of questions. So first of all, that photo from the beginning that you then showed, the present one, was that taken from the south side, or what direction are we looking at San Gorgonio from?
Both of those pictures were taken from Poupad Hill.
Okay, and that is that south of the peak, or
that's north of the peak.
North of the peak? Okay. All right. So, oh, and somebody just asked, background photo, where is that? That's Midnight Lake, right?
Right, Sierra Nevada.
Okay, and then there was a question about sheep grazing. When they stopped grazing and it recovered, did it fill in with native plants or invasive plants?
That's a good question. Up there now in, like, say, Barton Flats, there are some, quite a few of the native grasses still there. But there are also several invasive plants, Mediterranean type plants that are in the area as well. But it used to be a real grassy area, and now it's like bare dirt most of the time. You know, there's not very much grass there, of course, because it's full of people, campgrounds and so forth.
Right. And then I think Mary Ann mentioned that the Forest Service was first called the Forest Guard. Do you know about that?
I haven't heard that.
Okay. And that actually is what they were doing at first, was guard.
That's what they were definitely doing. It's a good description of what the first Forest Service people were doing.
And then Joyce Burke mentioned that it was defenders of San Gorgonio, not defenders of wilderness. And she worked on that, apparently.
Oh, okay.
And I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. Some comments about the need for more funding for our national forests, of course. I don't see any others. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question directly or a comment, that would be appropriate. Now I'm going to take the spotlight off and just put it on speaker. So anybody that wants to, yeah, now can you take off the share, Walt?
Oh, I
Yeah,
thought I
it's-
did. Am I still sharing?
No,
Yeah.
no, you're not.
Now you're not. Now you're not.
Joyce has her hand up.
Thanks, Walter. You did a very good job. I wanted to correct you just one thing. It's Alice Creeper, not Cooper. And I think of her as my model for how to best protect wilderness. She was superb. I called her the first generation wilderness protectionist. And I'd like to think I worked on the second and third stage because we added to the wilderness in 84 and 94. One with the Forest Service portions and one with the BLM portions in the California Desert Protection Act. And I am so proud of all the work that San Gorgonio Volunteer Association does. So I'm applauding all the work all your volunteers do.
Thank you. On behalf of the organization, I thank you very much.
And I'll chime in too. Thank you, Joyce. It's been a long time. We used to hike together a long time ago,
Yeah.
but the chapter does still have an Alice Cooper Award that we award most years for exceptional service to the chapter. So, and I also wanted to comment on the Forest Guard. I was on a Sierra Club national outing in Southeast Oregon, and our leader there meant, the Forest Guard was a thing, and there was a Forest Guard building that was transported up to the Desert Museum up in Eastern Oregon. So that was what they started out as, the Forest Guard. It was interesting. But thank you for this presentation. Very interesting.
Here's another question. Was Dollar Lake man-made as well?
No, it's the only natural lake in the whole area.
Hmm.
There's a couple of other little natural lakes. I think Crystal Lake is a natural lake over by Lake Arrowhead, and there might be one other one, small.
Yeah,
But
San
yeah,
Gabriel.
Dollar Lake was supposedly named because it was round like a dollar, like a silver dollar.
Okay, here's a comment and question. I've been to Dry Lake several times, but have never noticed a dam that could create the unnatural lake. How is Dry Lake made into a lake?
Well, it isn't a dam like you would, it's like they just used rocks, earth, and logs and just dredged up dirt and blocked the exit. It's a very shallow lake.
So they've basically blocked off the drainage.
Just blocked off the drainage, yes.
There are a lot of little lakes like that in the Sierras up in the Evergreen Wilderness.
Anybody else with comments or questions? Mary Ann, do you have any general chapter announcements you'd like to make?
Well, I want to thank Walter. First of all, this was very interesting. I love some of those old pictures of things that you wouldn't think of in our local mountains. You think of those in Yosemite or something like that. That was really interesting. And just wanted to mention that I appreciate John and the others, Julianne and Carla, that have put together our trail talks over those last 3 years almost now, and going into our third year in January. So I'm not sure if you have an announcement on January yet or not.
We don't have a January meeting or a topic yet.
Okay.
And I wonder how long we'll be able to continue with the monthly trail talk presentations. We've covered a lot of area.
Well, I think we could probably continue it and work together with the chapter. We've kind of stopped our monthly presentation or meetings over COVID, but I think we're ready to, start up something. So maybe we could combine chapter and trail talks and come up with something. So we don't want to give up on this. It's too good. And the chapter just, we do a lot of things. We do a lot of outings, a lot of fun in the outdoors. We do a lot of wilderness protection. The deserts are going to be a big focus of our chapters over the next few years as we look at protecting more and more of our state lands in the 30 by 30, in line with the 30 by 30 resolution that the governor, or declaration of the governor, that we protect 30% of our lands by 2030. So that's a big effort our chapter is working on. And a lot of that land is in our deserts. So that's going to be something that we'll focus on. We should probably have some desert presentations coming up. And yeah, Bobby Joe has, I'd say, a couple of comments in here. Interesting book called San Gorgonio Wilderness Preserve by John Robinson, and then maybe a history of the original people of the mountains and the contributions and who is, and they're still here. It's not like they're gone. We
Right.
still have the Tongva and the Skis and several tribes in our chapter that would be interesting to hear more about. And then some of you may have gotten the email from our chapter that we also last Friday filed another lawsuit, this time against the county, about another warehouse project that was approved by San Bernardino County right in residential areas, just rezoning residential areas and putting in 3.5 million square feet of warehousing that brings in so many diesel truck trips and hurts our air quality. So a lot of things happening in the chapter, and I hope folks will keep checking in, not just with Trail Talks. So get your Palm and Pine emails, and you'll get a hard copy Palm and Pine if you're a member in January, late January. So thank you for doing this, John.
Oh, you're welcome. And if we don't have, I think Julianne was working on getting someone to present in January, and I possibly could do another talk about my hiking on the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. I've never presented that to this group.
Yeah.
So that's
interesting.
possibility.
I have lots of stuff I could do too if you need something. So I'm going to be taking one of our chapter projects where you have a Salton Sea task force that's working on a lot of issues at the Salton Sea. I'm going to be going down there at the end of this month. So that could be another one that we talk about at Salton Sea and all the issues happening there. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight.
I have a question for you about the Salton Sea.
Yes.
Does the Salton Sea continue to take water from the Colorado River to keep its level up, or is it entirely filled with just runoff from agriculture?
It's mostly agricultural runoff. Most of that water goes from the Colorado River into the Imperial Irrigation District, and that runoff comes into the Salton Sea. So the Salton Sea is pretty much dead, dead lake at this point. There's a little bit of input from the Whitewater River, a little bit from the New River, but not enough to keep it viable. So there are plans, we're very much involved in the Colorado River planning for the next few years as we continue this horrible, we don't even call it a drought anymore, because a drought sounds temporary. It's not a drought, it's climate change and aridification, which is a big word, aridification of our area. So we have volunteers and staff working on a Salton Sea task force to make sure that the Salton Sea isn't ignored as they look at water allocations for the Colorado River. And there's money from the state, money from the federal government to try to shore things up, whether it's, a big problem is not just the lack of water in the sea, but the results of the drying up of the sea and all that playa that's left with very harmful chemical in the dust that's floating around and really harmful to the local communities. Plus, there's the lithium extraction that is being considered at the geothermal plant area, which could be a big boon for the area, or it could be an environmental disaster, but it sounds like it could be a very positive thing if it's done correctly. So there's a lot going on at the Salton Sea, yes.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop the recording now.